shy on men who can make bear sign. Now, I was thinking that you could spread down your blankets on the hearth, but you can sleep with me tonight. You go to work on this specialty of yours right after breakfast in the morning, and show us what you can do in that line." They talked quite a while longer, and then turned in for the night. The next morning after breakfast was over, he got the needed articles together and went to work. But there was a surprise in store for him. There was nearly a dozen men lying around, all able eaters. By 10 o'clock he began to turn them out, as he said he could. When the regular cook had to have the stove to get dinner, the taste which we had made us ravenous for more. Dinner over, he went at them again in earnest. A boy riding towards the railroad with an important letter dropped in, and as he claimed he could only stop for a moment, we stood aside until he had had a taste, though he filled himself like a poisoned pup. After eating a solid hour, he filled his pockets and rode away. One of our regular men called after him, "Don't tell anybody what we got." We didn't get any supper that night. Not a man could have eaten a bite. Miller made him knock off along in the shank of the evening, as he had done enough for one day. The next morning after breakfast, he fell to at the bear sign once more. Miller rolled a barrel of flour into the kitchen from the storehouse, and told him to fly at them. "About how many do you think you'll want?" asked our bear sign man. "That big tub won't be any too many," answered Miller. "Some of these fellows haven't had any of this kind of truck since they were little boys. If this gets out, I look for men from other camps." The fellow fell to his work like a thoroughbred, which he surely was. About 10 o'clock, 2 men rode up from a camp to the north, which the boy had passed the day before with the letter. They never went near the dugout, but straight to the kitchen. That movement showed that they were on to the racket. An hour later, old Tom Cave rode in, his horse all in a lather, all the way from Garrettson's camp, 25 miles to the east. The old sinner said that he had been on the frontier some little time, and that these were the best bear sign he had tasted in 40 years. He refused to take a stool and sit down like civilized folks, but stood up by the tub and picked out the ones which were a pale brown. After dinner, our man threw off his overshirt, unbuttoned his red undershirt, and turned it in until you could see the hair on his breast. Rolling up his sleeves, he flew at his job once more. He was getting his work reduced to a science by this time. He rolled his dough, cut his dough, and turned out the fine brown bear sign to the satisfaction of all. His capacity, however, was limited. About 2 o'clock, Doc Langford and 2 of his peelers were seen riding up. When he came into the kitchen, Doc swore by all that was good and holy that he hadn't heard that our artist had come back to that country. But any one that was noticing could see him edge around to the tub. It was easy to see that he was lying. This luck of ours was circulating faster than a secret amongst women. Our man, though, stood at his post like the boy on the burning deck. When night came on, he hadn't covered the bottom of the tub. When he knocked off, Doc Langford and his men gobbled up what was left. We gave them a mean look as they rode off, but they came back the next day 5 strong. Our regular men around the camp didn't like it, the way things were going. They tried to act polite to— "Calling bear signs doughnuts," interrupted Quince Forrest, "reminds me what—" "Will you kindly hobble your lip?" said Officer. "I have the floor at present. As I was saying, they tried to act polite to company that way, but we hadn't got a smell the second day. Our man showed no signs of fatigue, and told several good stories at night. He was tough. The next day was Christmas, but he had no respect for a holiday, and made up a large batch of dough before breakfast. It was a good thing he did, for early that morning, Original John Smith and 4 of his peelers rode in from the west, their horses all covered with frost. They must have started at daybreak. It was a good 22-mile ride. They wanted us to believe that they had simply come over to spend Christmas with us. Company that way, you can't say anything. But the easy manner in which they gravitated around that tub, not even waiting to be invited, told a different tale. They were not nearly satisfied by noon. Then who should come drifting in as we were sitting down to dinner but Billy Dunlap and Jim Hale from Quinlan's camp, 30 miles south on the Cimarron. Dunlap always holed up like a bear in the winter, and several of the boys spilled their coffee at the sight of him. He put up a thin excuse, just like the rest. Anyone could see through it. But there it was again. He was company. Lots of us had eaten at his camp and complained of his chuck. Therefore, we were nice to him. Miller called our man out behind the kitchen and told him to knock off if he wanted to. But he wouldn't do it. He was clean strained. I'm not talking. Dunlap ate hardly any dinner, we noticed, and the very first batch of bear sign turned out. He loads up a tin plate and goes out and sits behind the storehouse in the sun, all alone in his glory. He satisfied himself out of the tub after that. He and Hale stayed all night, and Dunlap kept everyone awake with the nightmares. Yes, kept fighting the demons all night. The next morning Miller told him that he was surprised that an old gray-haired man like him didn't know when he had had enough, but must gorge himself like some silly kid. Miller told him that he was welcome to stay a week if he wanted to, but he would have to sleep in the stable. It was cruel to the horses, but the men were entitled to a little sleep, at least in the winter. Miller tempered his remarks with all kindness, and Dunlap acted as if he was sorry, and as good as admitted that his years were telling on him. That day our man filled his tub. He was simply an artist on bear sign. "Calling bear sign doughnuts," cut in Quince Forrest again, as soon as he saw an opening, "reminds me of what the little boy said who went—" But there came a rumbling of many hoofs from the bed ground. "There's hell for you," said half a dozen men in a chorus, and every man in camp ran for his horse but the cook, and he climbed into the wagon. The roar of the running cattle was like approaching thunder, but the flash from the 6-shooters of the men on guard indicated that they were quartering by camp, heading out towards the hills. Horses became so excited that they were difficult to bridle. There was plenty of earnest and sincere sweating done that night. All the fine sentiment and melancholy of the hour previous vanished in a moment, and the men threw themselves into their saddles, riding deep, for it was uncertain footing to the horses. Within 2 minutes from the time the herd had left the bed ground, 14 of us rode on their left point and across their front, firing our 6-shooters in their faces. By the time the herd had covered a scant mile, we had thrown them into a mill. They had run so compactly that there were no stragglers, so we loosened out and gave them room. But it was a long time before they relaxed any, but continued going round and round like a water wheel or an endless chain. The foreman ordered 3 men on the heaviest horses to split them. The men rode out a short distance to get the required momentum, wheeled their horses, and wedge-shaped struck the sea of cattle and entered. But it instantly closed in their wake as though it had been water. For an hour they rode through the herd back and forth, now from this quarter, now from that, and finally the mill was broken. After midnight, as luck would have it, heavy dark clouds banked in the northwest, and lightning flashed, and before a single animal had lain down, a drizzling rain set in. That settled it. It was an all-night job now. We drifted about hither and yon. Horses, men, and cattle turned their backs to the wind and rain and waited for morning. We were so familiar with the signs of coming day that we turned them loose half an hour before dawn, leaving herders, and rode for camp. As we groped our way in that dark hour before dawn, hungry, drenched, and bedraggled, there was nothing gleeful about us, while Bob Blades expressed his disgust over our occupation. "If I ever get home again," said he, and the tones of his voice were an able second to his remarks, "you all can go up the trail that want to, but here's one chicken that won't. There isn't a cowman in Texas who has money enough to hire me again." "Aw, hell now," said Bull.